The state of North Carolina estimates that our state has more than $8 billion worth of immediate school capital needs. Now, Governor Cooper and some in the legislature would like to see a nearly $2 billion school construction bond, while other lawmakers are more friendly to the idea of using existing funds to pay as we go. The John Locke Foundation's Dr. Terry Stoops has been assessing the need and the options going forward. He joins us now to talk about that. Terry, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
How pressing are the needs for schools in terms of facilities across the state?
Well, it varies. In some places, they have sufficient facilities, and they've planned ahead to meet their maintenance costs, any additions that they need for increasing student enrollment. So there are some districts that are in a fine position as far as school facilities go. These mainly are urban and suburban districts. The rural districts in North Carolina might be a different story. I mean, some of these districts have schools that are very old, and so they actually do have actual facilities needs that probably need to be attended to sooner rather than later. But there isn't sort of one typical need that each county has. It really varies between needing new construction, additions to current construction, or renovations of existing construction.
You've also been writing about the fact that in many parts of North Carolina, and people might be surprised to learn this, but enrollment is actually dropping in public schools.
That's right.
That would factor into the needs, would it not?
Absolutely, because a lot of, especially rural districts, created small elementary schools scattered around the county, given the difficulties of getting students to school and not forcing them to ride on a bus for an hour and a half every day. And so now we're coming to a situation in many rural districts where they have small, under-enrolled elementary schools scattered across the district. And so these are districts that have had to grapple with the difficult choice, and it really is a difficult choice, of trying to keep these small, under-enrolled schools open, or combining schools and getting that enrollment in just a few elementary schools rather than several. So there are a lot of interesting dynamics happening, especially in these rural communities. And that's just the facilities that they have, doesn't really talk about how to pay for them.
Based on those differences across counties and districts, it would seem to make sense then that the solution to an individual area's needs has got to be quite personalized, that it would be difficult to put together a one-size-fits-all answer to this. Well,
that was the idea when the state decided that the counties would primarily be responsible for school construction. And this is nothing new. We have had an arrangement in North Carolina since the 1930s where the state would pick up the majority of expenses for student operating expenses. And the counties would take care of the capital expenses. They would take care of the school buildings and the maintenance required to keep up those school buildings. Now, in various times through history in North Carolina, we have had the state step in to provide funds for localities for their school facilities needs, but mainly they have relied on generating their own tax funds to pay for the bonds or the other types of debt that a county can take out for school construction. So we're seeing now an increasing call to change that and have the state play more of a role in school construction, which is much different than what the original designs for how those responsibilities will be handled occurred in the 1930s.
And in fact, that leads us to our discussion that we are now starting to hear pretty seriously and robustly from members of not only the North Carolina General Assembly, but we're hearing from the governor on this. Terry, it seems like the discussion has now boiled down to an either-or option to address this. You have the governor and some members of the legislature who say, you know what, we need a statewide school construction bond. It needs to go on the ballot. Voters need to say yes or no. You have other lawmakers who are saying, look, it's probably a better idea not to take on debt, and let's pay as we go, and let's figure out where the needs are. Give us your sense, first of all, is it an either or, and what are the pros and cons of those two approaches?
Well, they don't have to do either, certainly, and they could say that historically and according to state statute that the counties are primarily responsible for school facilities, and they would be well within their right to do that. But legislators on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers have decided that there's something that the state is going to do. And that something boils down to the two options that you mentioned. The bond, of course, is something that we've done in North Carolina in the past, a statewide bond for school facilities, and we did it in 1996, was the last year that the state provided a bond for school facilities. Now, that's not the only thing the state does. It's worth mentioning that the good old lottery provides money every year for school facilities. So the state is involved in facilities in a certain way. The bond would basically take the idea of putting a choice before voters about whether the state can authorize this debt. And then if the voters approve, then they sell bonds into the open market to buyers, get the money from the buyers, and then distribute the funds from the sale of those bonds to school districts.
The other option says, no, let's not take on debt to do this, but some lawmakers say, we've got money now, we can maybe add some money to a fund, and let's pay for this as we go along.
Yes, because bonds come with interest, and what the Senate is saying, that we can avoid $1.2 billion in interest paid to the folks that buy up the bonds, and instead do a pay-as-you-go plan. This would provide a dedicated amount of money each year to be distributed for school capital expenses. It's an approach that the Senate has really taken on for not just school facilities, but state facilities as well. They believe that this is a more responsible plan. There are downsides to this plan, and one of them is that you have to wait till the money comes in. Unlike bonds, you can't sell, say, $300 million in bonds in the open market and get that money almost immediately. So this would take time, but it would avoid an enormous amount of interest payments that could be used for other things.
Terry, you wrote a very interesting piece recently for the Greensboro News and Record, and you really keyed in on what you believe is the key to success going forward. You say there have to be fresh ideas, fresh ways of looking at this situation. You brought up an issue of public-private partnerships and that maybe school districts need to think more seriously about that. How would that work?
Well, this would be asking the private sector what they could do and how they can help, and how a relationship between a school district and the private sector can effectively build schools. Now, to overcome some of the issues that we have with that would require, of course, close oversight of such a public-private partnership to ensure that no one's getting swindled or anything like that. But we have to start asking the private sector what they can do, and we have to start considering what the school districts are willing to accept as far as school facilities. For years, we have operated on what I call a wish fulfillment model of school buildings, and that's that we have built the school that everyone wishes they had. But we're in a situation now with $8 billion in needs that require us to start rethinking the types of school buildings that we build. And I feel like a partnership between the private sector and a school district could help us get to that point where we meet those needs and perhaps build the school buildings that we need going forward.